What does that mean?
That means we'll be broadcasting live over the internet.
Oh, wow. Exciting. Hello, Internet.
Yeah. Pays the bills. Welcome to Baltimore SharePoint Users Group, the October edition. I'm Shadi Laser. I'm your host, your MC for the evening for these festivities. And we're going to have an interesting discussion tonight on Microsoft 365. But first, when it comes to who we are, what we do, it's important to understand what Beastbug is all about. So since 2007, Baltimore SharePoint Users Group has existed, and it was started as a way to allow for, at the time, my co-founder and I, Eric Carlin, were working at a firm that was focused on early adoption of SharePoint technologies. And at the time, the release of SharePoint was March 2007. So it was in, let's say, early release mode. And we were working with companies that wanted to be on the cutting edge. So they wanted to implement custom solutions first. Very edge of your seat, bleeding edge type of deployments. But there were very little documentation to support these deployments. So feature stapling my sites and, custom search providers and search scopes and you name it was our day-to-day work. So we figured that there has to be some people out there who are going through the same challenges. And so on a stormy night in 2007, Beastbug was launched. Now, Baltimore SharePoint throughout the years has been more or less the Saturday Night Live of speaking talent and grooming and cultivating the next generation of Microsoft professional talent, especially in the SharePoint and or .NET space within the Mid-Atlantic region, primarily through our monthly meetings, but also through our annual conference, which is SharePoint Saturday Baltimore. And so with SharePoint Saturday, because many people, if you attend the user group regularly, you would say, how on earth would I know, how could I not know what SharePoint Saturday is? But for many people in my contracts where I'm delivering training and different deployments, many people don't know. So SharePoint Saturday is a free one-day conference. It's operated in a franchise model. So there's a SharePoint Saturday, Kansas City, EC, Philadelphia, Baltimore. And so this is its intent is for you, the attendee, to be able to connect to the people who write the blog posts, who write the books, who basically dictate the pace of the industry from a knowledge and knowledge sharing standpoint. So with that being said, you get to fellowship with your different speakers in close proximity, not only through the sessions, which are broken down for everyone from administrator to developer to project manager to end user to beginners. And so this gives everyone an opportunity to learn and progress. For smaller companies, it's an excellent way to equip your information workers and your technical team as well, because the training is free and you can come and you can choose which path you want to take in terms of what you want to learn. And that is has been a proven path to success for many companies. I'm very proud to say that through Baltimore SharePoint, a number of ultra successful seven-figure Microsoft practices, Microsoft partners have been launched and nurtured and cultivated throughout this time. So we look at the success over the years and also to start to quantify what we've been able to do, because it's very easy to say, well, we just meet and there's catered food and we talk about SharePoint and technology, but from a numbers standpoint, we have been in one of the number one market in the world in terms of Microsoft technology. And a number of people who have been MVPs and technical experts, so on and so forth, have crossed our stage, and many people have either started companies or grown their companies through the BSpug network. So it's always important to look at how we can improve and how we can do better in terms of just making sure that our approach is more effective. So we're looking at that and moving things forward as we close out 2020. Now, of course, for those of you watching this, you are seeing me talk now, but you also can be a presenter. And so if you are a technical resource of some sort, you do not have to be an expert, but we're looking for sessions that are focused on break fix, how to, lessons learned, case studies. And basically, you don't have to speak for 75 minutes. You can do a 20-minute session, 15-minute session, as long as there's a start and a resolution to the session. Or what has been very popular for many speakers is that they have a session that they're looking to deliver at a larger conference, and they come to our group and they go through their proof of concept, and we help them shape and mold the session that they want to deliver at a larger event, the big league, so to speak. And I've often, for those who attend the meetings regularly, I've often mentioned our group as the like a farm league system in baseball. So the next generation of talent is able to hone their skills, and so they can get called up to the big leagues. I'd like to thank all attendees who are tuning in, not only live on the broadcast, but this is being multicasted to several different platforms. Some of you may be on, let's say, my personal social media profile. Other people, let's say, know my work within SharePoint or the work with Baltimore SharePoint. I just want to welcome you all. And so if you have any questions, please type them in the comments, and we're going to get on with this. So for more questions on, let's say, if you want to be a speaker, if you want to be a sponsor, please email Baltimore Spug, and Spug is spelled SPUG, @live.com. I want to especially thank the good folks at ProObject. ProObject is based in Hanover, Maryland, and for several years has provided us a consistent location to meet, to fellowship, and to grow the numbers of the group. I will say that within these times, or stay at home and pandemic, and let's say social distancing, we have not been meeting at ProObject, and we've taken all of our operations virtual, and it will be virtual for the foreseeable future, definitely through 2020. But ProObject has been with us every step of the way, and we cannot thank you enough. So they typically have, let's say, different SharePoint options that are available in terms of positions, whether it's administrator with a sprinkling of SharePoint, or SharePoint positions altogether where you're a specialist. And so in this particular case, if you have any questions, or let's say if your contract is a bit shaky and you're looking to make a move, then please send me your resume. I'm going to forward it to Mr. Ted Staley, who is a mainstay at our meetings. And Ted is the person who makes it happen in terms of finding you employment or contract opportunities with ProObject. Okay, so we're going to transition into our discussion of the evening. And Nate, please unmute yourself. And okay, so who we have on the discussion this evening is a friend of the program, ladies and gentlemen, in that Nate has flown from his location of Middle America and has participated at Sharepoint Saturday, Baltimore on a couple of occasions, and is a friend to the Baltimore Sharepoint Users Group as he has delivered his brand of magic. He is a Microsoft MVP. He's also a serial author. He's a multiple-time author. And what we're going to discuss in this discussion is his new book, which is the Microsoft 365 Cookbook, which is available on all major book platforms, Amazon.com being one of them. Nate, please say hello to the people.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for that nice introduction, Shadid. It's a real honor to be back.
Excellent. So as we go into this, first of all, what in terms of, because when we talk about different platforms or different flavors of SharePoint, Office 365, and now Microsoft 365, administration has different definitions, where on-prem might be full-blown mechanic. And as we move to hybrid environments into the cloud, that definition changes a bit more. So to start things off, what intrigued you about the state of, let's say, administration that led to writing this book?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think, just having written my first one, first of all, that kind of gave me a little bit of a fever to write again for Packet. And my first one was based on administration. And I never saw myself really focusing on that space because I know you knew me when I was first starting out in my kind of SharePoint career, and I was very end user focused. And I still like to think of myself as being very end user focused, and I want to help teams on the ground be more productive. So working in the administration space was kind of a stretch for me at first. And I just took the challenge on from Packet with that first book for them. And then this one came along. They had a similar opportunity, and they said, okay, this one's not an exam guide. It's on administration. And I started to find myself in this revolving door of administration opportunities alongside my career, which, continually came up as you're going to be the administrator and not necessarily the trainer or, anything like that. Which, it took me a while to adjust to that because I always saw myself as a teacher. But you're right. There is this evolution of administration, and even in my current workplace, we have a conversation sometimes about whose responsibility is what, and what does an administrator even do? Do they have admin rights even? Because you can be considered an administrator without access to the admin center, which is wild to me. But I tend to prescribe to the philosophy that you're an administrator if you do have that access. It just makes it simpler from a technical perspective. Just thinking, if you're going to be able to fully administer the tool and have the kind of capabilities that you need to do it technically, then you would have that access. But there is that non-technical piece too. You can absolutely be more of a social, more on the ground, a leader, a business process champion who is also an administrator in a different way.
Excellent. Now, when take us into the conversation that you had in the work center, in that conversation is one that's being held in work centers around the world. When you have, let's say, administrators who previously were hands-on in previous versions of SharePoint, and now they may feel they're restricted to, as you mentioned, people who have more of a social role within the organization. Just take us through a few basic roles and responsibilities that organizations need to be more mindful of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think, just because I kind of have tunnel vision on my current situation, I'm sure a lot of people will relate to this. Microsoft 365 is really kind of changing the way we look at just, productivity and collaboration administration in general. Not just talking about Microsoft, but talking about those of you who have Cisco products, like Jabber or WebEx, people who use Zoom in the workplace, Slack. There are all these different components. And in my own workplace right now, what kind of happens is we have these people who historically have been designated as the telephony administrator, these people who are designated as the chat administrator. And Microsoft does a really good job at breaking those roles out, but we get into this gray area where we start to have these, a little bit of a friction conversation, because Microsoft as a suite, Microsoft 365 challenges us in those traditional structures that we have to make decisions that are sometimes difficult. And the best example I have of that is Microsoft Teams. Because you can be a team service administrator, which is like the overall teams administrator. Then we have like the team's communication administrator who maybe focuses just on a telephony piece or something. But what do you do when your organization still uses Cisco for phones? And what do you do when someone else is responsible for chat? And what do you decide you're going to turn on or off in Teams? Because then you start to have a little bit of friction with the team service administrator who also wants a hand in something. And then, of course, because Teams is built on SharePoint, if your organization is so large that it's separated those two roles where you have a separate Microsoft Teams administrator and a separate SharePoint administrator, then they have to work together, because we're talking about external sharing policies that can conflict, but they rely on each other. And so your user experience is affected if you don't have really good communication between all these separated admin roles. So I don't think I'm alone at all when it comes to these kind of conversations that are happening. And trying to figure out this new way forward to be collaborative across all these separate, telecom versus, productivity versus app support departments that may exist in your company.
When it comes to the idea of, let's say, Microsoft 365 as the overall umbrella, the platform, the rainbow, so to speak. Underneath that umbrella is several different platforms or software offerings that exist, such as Microsoft Teams, such as the Power Platform, so on and so forth. So from a general standpoint, when you're setting up your Microsoft 365 environment, what are your recommendations to, let's say, fan the flames of people who want Teams set up right away? Is there a certain process that you follow in order to roll things out correctly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so historically, what's worked for me is working with C-suite executives. That tends to be my first stop, because you can do a lot of on the ground kind of work. And that's just what I call, talking to end users, doing trainings, and talking to that occasional person who's like, hey, my cousin uses Teams at work. They think it's amazing. Why don't we use it? And you have an opportunity there to have a dialogue one-on-one with that end user and be like, I don't know, man, I wish we could, enable it and make it a thing. And you kind of, all you're doing is kind of fanning the flames of a negativity about the organization. But instead, you have that opportunity to take that feedback back to the executives who do have those kind of decision-making powers and say, there's an interest in this. Can we explore it? Can I demonstrate it? To do whatever to start pushing that adoption. But it has to start at that C-suite level because, in the end, going back to the administration discussion, those roles are going to have to be figured out. Those departments are going to have to gel differently than maybe they ever have before. And having that C-suite back you, just knowing that they were interested in the product, they've seen it work, maybe they believe in your pilot program plan or something, and they want to give it a shot. Having that encouragement behind those department heads, just gives you so much more, strength when you're bringing it back to the organization. And then at some point, you find yourself back in that training room with that end user who heard about Teams, and you have the ability to say something that is, 100% true, it is positive, and it's moving your organization forward instead of stirring perhaps feelings of resentment or confusion with people who maybe want to be in a different place than you are.
Excellent point. Now, Joe Dunn has mentioned in the chat that what Joe has run into is a scenario where what do you do when the exchange, like a previous version of a previous team member doesn't know some of the basics of, let's say, Active Directory and how that impacts, let's say, using Teams, using Outlook, so on and so forth. So essentially, if I'm to paraphrase here, if you have a team member, IT team member who does not understand the ins and outs of, let's say, Microsoft 365, and that individual is tagged as the global admin, how does that person, let's say, get up to speed in the best way and not cause a train wreck?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been there, Joe. And I'm sure we're not the only ones. That's a pretty common scenario, I think, where people get kind of grandfathered into positions that they don't have the training for, or they didn't take the time to really get familiar with all that's changing. And in Microsoft 365, it's becoming less of a choice to, it's more of a requirement is how I should say it. It's more of a requirement to stay up to date because that roadmap is constantly evolving. And if you aren't reading your message center, if you aren't staying on top of that roadmap, chances are you're going to fall into a bit of a mess in your workplace. And, with that kind of mess, you may run into compliance issues, or you could run into any kind of, productivity issues. Maybe they're removing a feature that a big group of your users rely on. So it all comes down to communication from that aspect. But as far as a difficult employer, someone who may be set in their ways and isn't really open-minded to picking up new skills and attending trainings and user groups and events like Sharepoint Saturday, where they have to sometimes donate their time because not every workplace will sponsor attendance. But keep in mind, for those of you who haven't attended but are interested, that sometimes workplaces will sponsor your attendance, meaning maybe you get Friday off and you can go on Saturday or something. And that could be considered work time. So there are some ways around that. But for that person who is a little bit more stubborn, the only thing that's really worked for me in those situations is making that person part of the training, where you bring them in as a co-presenter. You say, hey, I'd like to share this opportunity with you to lead this group on training about XYZ. And they're like, oh, I have a more formal role in this. I want to make sure I've got my stuff together. I want to appear like I know what I'm talking about, because you're right. I am the global admin. I have a voice in this. And so suddenly they might take more accountability. And there's another thing that people do, and I'm seeing this trend in a lot of public service sectors, and I'm sure it's other places too. I just don't hear about it. But people are doing this thing called learning together. And it's not unlike what we're doing right now. We're just getting together as a group, but these are, coworkers. These are teams that designate maybe 2 to 3 hours a week. They get around the same monitor, in non-COVID times. But, virtually they just all connect to the same session. And they say, today or this week, our goal is to learn, this one tool or learn this one feature that was just released and get familiar with it to see how we might incorporate it. And something that comes to the top of my mind right now that you might want to look into if you're in Office 365 is Microsoft Lists. It's not brand new, but it's new enough where some of your administrators who maybe don't, stay up to date may not know a lot about it and how it impacts the SharePoint experience or how it ties into OneDrive. So just taking that 1 or 2 hours this week or next week to learn together. It gets you all on the same page. You all heard the same information, and then you can start making decisions together about it.
Excellent point. As a side note, Michael Tyson, longtime Beast Bug member Michael Tyson, is looking to form a special interest group of individuals who are looking to, let's say, come together, share ideas, and basically build things together. And whether it's Power Platform across Microsoft 365. So please, if you know Michael personally, contact him, tell him I sent you, or please get in touch with me at baltimorespug@live.com, and I will make an introduction. I'll be joining his group, and we'll be working on, he has a solution that he built last week. And so we're going to dissect that and then just go down the path and continue to learn, but opening it up to the group so that more people who have that interest can dive in and learn, because there's only so much you can learn from, let's say, a YouTube video or whatever information you consume. But you have to put the rubber to the road and get into it. Now, another friend of the program, Jamie Willis Rose, has said, we had a client that wanted to use a third-party tool to add governance around Microsoft Teams. Long story short, the tool did not pass InfoSec's review. And he is looking for a path forward that does not rely on third-party tools, and he just ordered your new book, Nate.
That's awesome. Thank you, Jamie.
Yes. So, and as Joe mentioned, community of practice is right. That's what just been mentioned by Nate, and also what Michael Tyson is looking to do as well.
Yeah, that's great. I like that phrase too, community of practice. I've heard that, and maybe I'll use it more.
Yes.
So Jamie, about your governance question, I'm curious if you feel comfortable sharing what tool it was you were using. I haven't personally put it through the test, but I know ShareGate's Apricot is a third-party solution that does governance. And so I'm just curious if that's the one. Okay. So as far as something that you could do internal, maybe just using Microsoft, I haven't really done that with Teams, but I've done, SharePoint governance, of course, using SharePoint. But, it's just something you kind of have to figure out, with your C-suite, getting some little bit of buy-in there to, get the endorsement on, what is governance going to look like for your organization. And it was interesting, maybe 2 years ago, I was giving presentations about doing governance in your organization. And some people were kind of surprised when they came to my session because my governance tends to be more people-focused. And so, yeah, we might have some static document or some static resource site where people can go out and they can be like, oh, an appropriate site looks like this. This is the kind of stuff that we can post. These are the kind of guidelines I have to follow if I want to be a site owner, that kind of thing. So yeah, that should all be out there. But to me, governance isn't just something you create and post. It's not a publish and done kind of situation. So whatever you end up using to build out your governance solution, I know I'm not talking technically about putting the reins on something or restricting things technically, but to me, governance is always about training your end users, getting them together to evaluate things together to solve problems. And that's probably one of my favorite jobs I had when I was leading a governance for a healthcare organization. I'd get these site owners together once a month, and I'd say, here's the search reports we had for the last 6 months. Let's go through them, identify where people are getting frustrated, where the bottlenecks are, and let's improve our search by introducing, promoted results and query rules, that kind of thing. And I got them involved in making the experience better. But as far as the automation of governance pieces, that does get tricky because you can script stuff and you can do a little bit of stuff with Power Automate, of course, but nothing really compares to what we look for when we start seeking those third-party solutions that kind of, come in and intervene, like Apricot might.
Very awesome. Now, Joe mentions that Joe bought the book first day. longtime follower of the blog. And when we say it's a Nate Chamberlain trick, it always works.
Well, that's awesome. Glad to hear it.
Yes. And Dusty has said that there's another tool for governance called Gimel. But his experience with implementation has been interesting. So Gimel, let's add that to the virtual whiteboard as a potential tool to use and implement. So let me ask you this, Nate. It's often said that we learn when we teach, or if you want to learn something, the fastest way to do it is to teach it. So in writing this book, and it's a lot of information to digest within the book, what has it taught you or kind of reframed in your mind in terms of Microsoft 365 administration?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think every time I'm asked to write a book, I have that moment of hesitation because I'm being asked to write something that I don't know everything about. That's never been the case where someone says, hey, can you do this for us? And I'm like, yep, I'm the expert. That's not how it works. For me, it's always been, hey, can you write this book? And then I think about it and I might have a drink or two while I ponder it. But eventually I get to the point where I always arrive at, which is, I do know a lot. I may not know everything. And I always find when I write these books that even the stuff I know has changed and it has evolved since I learned it the first time. So even the stuff that I think I know, when I go through to write these books or when I go through to give a session, I always go through and make sure my demos still work. I go through and double check my material to make sure it's still valid because I'll never know everything. And I love that. I love being a lifelong student, having that opportunity to continually grow and evolve and be challenged by opportunities like this. So yeah, definitely. Every single chapter of this book, no matter how simple it was, getting started with O365, I relearned a lot of stuff and even some newer stuff that I'm not so familiar with, such as like e-discovery and security and compliance, which, another one of my books is entirely about that. So I'm continually challenged to revisit these topics that are uncomfortable only because I don't do it every day. My job is, basically SharePoint administration, some general Office 365 stuff. But yeah, when it gets into that deeper stuff that's handled by somebody else, that's not necessarily a comfort area, but a welcome challenge.
Absolutely. Now, when we look at the book, let's pretend that someone is holding the cover or the book in their hand. They're staring at the cover. They're at their favorite bookstore, and they're making a decision whether or not to take a step forward. So, who is this book for?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I actually have two books on my desk right now. One is that one, so the one that I just wrote. And the other one is one by Gaurav Mahajan, which I'm not sure if he spoke for Beastbug before, but he's over there in Pittsburgh, so not too far. Yeah, and he wrote one that's a Microsoft 365 and SharePoint online cookbook. And both of our books came out around the same time. And so with both of those in mind, they're two different audiences. Whereas Gaurav's, first of all, it's massive. It's almost 800 pages, very impressive. And it's meant more for end users. So when you start flipping through his book, it's, with SharePoint specifically, how do you add an app? How do you add, a list? Those kind of things, simple. But by the time you get to the end of his book, I think he has an entire chapter dedicated to getting started with the SharePoint framework and doing development. So if you're an end user, beginner, or if you're starting to get started with development, that's the range that book's going to cover. And then mine doesn't touch development, so I'll just say that straight up. But everything else in my book is geared towards exclusively administrators. I'm not really putting a lot in this book that your everyday end user can do. I'm sharing PowerShell things that only administrators can do with the proper access as a global admin. We're talking about working in Azure AD. We're talking about working in all the admin centers for all the platform or Power Platform suites, SharePoint teams, e-discovery, getting into that kind of stuff. So the person holding my book in that bookstore, hopefully they'll open it up first, check out the table of contents, and just ask themselves, do I have access to these admin centers? Is this something I aspire to do? Because you don't have to be an administrator today to be interested in becoming one. But is this something that you want to learn to be able to do, a role that you want to grow into? And if yes, then I think absolutely it's a great fit. But if you're a user who's more comfortable being a site owner, a power user, then there is that other cookbook out there by Gorov, which would be a perfect fit. And it's got tons of ideas for just basic things you can do in Microsoft 365, all the way up to that entry into development.
Excellent. Now, Joe also adds that the best part of the book is that it's organized by what you want to do, then the answers, whether it's in the admin center, the GUI, or if it's using PowerShell. It doesn't separate the two types of solutions because they're bonded. It's all about what you do.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely, yeah. So the chapters of the book are all by basically app. Power Platforms lumped together in one bigger chapter. PowerShell got its own chapter. So if you're not too interested in PowerShell or not comfortable with it, then you can skip that chapter. And the idea is that you can absolutely open it up to the table of contents, find what it is that you do or you want to do, flip to that page, or work in reverse. And in both books, there's an index at the back, and you look for something as specific as external sharing. And then you go and you flip to the pages that are all noted that have that phrase in them. So whether you're comfortable going by app or topic through the table of contents, or there's something very specific you're looking for from the index, it's definitely meant to be a pick and mix kind of feel.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, I'm going to, are there any additional questions regarding Microsoft 365 administration, the cookbook, new book itself from the group? Okay, so I'm checking the chats here. What would you say was the chapter that, if any, has come up the most within your discussions, whether presentations, so on and so forth? Or let me ask you this, what are you most excited for people to read?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so personally, my favorite chapter in the book is the one on Microsoft Search. And that's because as I was writing it, things changed. And this is so frequent. If you're going to write a print book about a tech thing, you're going to write it. And before you're done, you're going to rewrite it. Because things do change that quickly. And that happened with Microsoft Search. So I started writing it. I was in love with the bookmarks and the locations and all these different result types that you can surface. And by the time I was finished, there was even more to write about. And I kind of redid it a bit because it's a constantly evolving area. And I feel like when people want to talk about Microsoft 365, some of the, at least as far as innovation goes, the things that are being talked about right now are, Microsoft Search and Syntax and Cortex and Power Platform. And being able to write about all of those except for Cortex Syntax, those two, was really exciting. And to me, I'm looking forward to spending more time getting into Microsoft Search and seeing what all is possible there and seeing what comes out of it next.
Awesome. Joe says, recommend, even if you're not a Microsoft 365 admin or even a site owner, because the book helps you realize what's possible, also how to ask the administrator, so how to have that discussion, even if you can't do it technically, and also what you can accomplish with your limited power or access.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. Got some proof right in the pages that something can be done.
Yes, you might want to reach out to Joe individually for that testimonial. That's a lot of good feedback.
Yeah, that's very kind. Thanks, Joe.
Yes. So where can we find more information about the myth, the legend that is Nate Chamberlain, and more information about this book so that we can make a purchase, we can recommend it to our technical teams, to management, and so that more information can get out about this cookbook?
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to keep it easy. So I used to be called SharePointLibrarian.com, which was kind of obscure. So I simplified and I rebranded a few years ago, and now I'm just NateChamberlain.com. So that's where I'll post, my speaking engagements when I'm more up to date than I am currently. It's where I post links to all of my books. So you can go out there and see everything that I've published, all on Amazon. And then I blog post pretty regularly. I try to do at least once a week. Sometimes it's multiple times. But that's how all this started, actually. Back in 2015, I started this blog, and it started gaining some traction. And I was really excited to be able to be a part of a community that I didn't even know existed. But suddenly I started posting and people started reaching out. I was like, hey, there's a kind of like you with, the Baltimore SharePoint user group, just you find there's this common interest and, why not? Let's create this community of knowledge and sharing. So that's kind of where that all started. But yes, you can find me out there. Also, I just want to put a plug in for the Global Con 4 conference, which is coming up. So I'll be posting about that shortly. But if you love professional development and you like it better when it's free, this is the thing for you. It's coming up starting next Tuesday, and they do 6 days of learning between now and the end of the year. And basically, you just tune into these live sessions. It's all kinds of Microsoft 365 topics. And you can't beat free. So you might as well give it a shot. Go to the sessions that interest you. It's all virtual.
Very awesome. Okay, so Jamie has been the go-to for all things helpful links here. So we have the link to natechamberlain.com in the chat. And also we have an endorsement to follow Nate on Twitter @ChamberNate. And then we have the link to GlobalCon 4, which is portal.collab365.community. Thank you, Jamie and Joe, for providing the links. And any closing thoughts, final words from you, Nate Chamberlain?
I want to express my gratitude to everybody who tuned in tonight. I think it's awesome that you're taking time out of your personal lives and your day after a long work day, no doubt, to continue to learn and to continue to be a part of a community outside of, a lot of us are just working from home offices. So getting out of there in a virtual way to connect and share and learn. So thank you for giving me a little bit of your time. I hope I found some value there, and thank you, Shadid, for inviting me. It's always such an honor.
Thank you. I like this format because what many people don't realize is that if you're working or you're doing something during the day, putting together slides it's time consuming. So to be able to have experts and rock stars to tune in and log on to the session and share their thoughts in more of an informal conversation, and have our members add their thoughts as well, is a lot less intense on a speaker, and it allows for that value exchange to take place, which is essentially why user groups are so important, because you're meeting people outside of the professional setting with the goal of improvement. So not everything needs to be a 40 slide PowerPoint with 5 demos and video for information exchange to take place. So on behalf of Nate Chamberlain, newly published author of the Microsoft 365 Administration Cookbook, I am Shadidi Laser, and this is Baltimore SharePoint Users Group, the virtual edition. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you chose to be here with us. And for that, we appreciate you. Thank you for tuning in. Join us next week. We'll be meeting the week before Thanksgiving, third Thursday of the month. And we'll be back with another great topic from another great mind in the Microsoft SharePoint and Office 365 space. Thank you very much for tuning in, and join us next month. Thank you, Dustin.